Welcome back to another enlightening episode of The Truth About the Plant, the show that takes you on a journey through the world of psychoactive plants and alternative wellness, all while delivering real, actionable insights that you crave. I'm your host, Christina Dees. This is my equally talented co-host, Dr. Amanda Ryman. Dr. Ryman and I show up each week to answer a question for you in 20 minutes or less. Dr. Ryman, why are we so passionate about this, and why do we do what we do?
Well, we do what we do because we are committed to the truth. We are committed to bringing you factual information about cannabis. It can be really hard to find good fact-based info about cannabis on the internet. Discussions of cannabis, even educational discussions, are censored on so many social media platforms, and everyone out there thinks they're an expert. So you could Google a question, one that may have very real implications for your health and well-being. And not only are you going to get about 100 different answers back, but many of them are going to completely contradict each other. So how do you know the truth? Well, that's where we come in. We are here to answer your most pressing cannabis questions in about 20 minutes or less, so you can get the info you need and get on with your day. You can think of us as your really cool aunties or your kick-ass granddaughters, the women in your life who will always tell you the truth.
And today we're going to tackle an important question that is as eye-opening as it is important. And the question is, why aren't women allowed to use cannabis? So many people are maybe wondering about this topic. I mean, of course, women are allowed to use cannabis, right? As there are no medical cannabis or adult use laws that specifically prevent women as a group from using cannabis. But at the same time, there are subtle attitudes and policies about women and cannabis that do raise eyebrows. So, Amanda, what exactly do we mean by why aren't women allowed to use cannabis?
Well, I'm really excited to have this discussion today. I've always been very fascinated with the ways that policies encourage or discourage certain behaviors without making it like super obvious that that's what they're trying to do. And the way that these subtleties weave themselves into society and into people's opinions about what should happen or shouldn't happen concerning certain groups, but then maybe even not realizing why they feel the way they do. So the concept of this episode was driven by a previous one that we did on cannabis and sex. And you can check that one out right now on our YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts. So in that episode, we talked about why women's sexual pleasure has been so undervalued. And we talked about the roles that women have typically played in romantic relationships and how that has influenced the underappreciation of women's sexual enjoyment. So the idea about a woman's role plays heavily into that. And I think the same can be said for cannabis, which is why we decided to kind of focus on that today.
Yeah, I mean, society has very specific ideas about what is appropriate for women and develops social sanctions for women who act outside of these roles, from the decision to work to raising kids as a single mom to deciding not to have kids at all. Society always seems to have something to say about what women should be doing.
Yep. And there's a name for that. It's called paternalism. And what that means is exerting control over a certain group because of the belief that this group cannot make healthy or rational decisions for themselves. So I think one of the most common examples of paternalism is how we treat children, right? So children don't get to make all of the decisions for themselves. They don't get to decide everything they want to eat, what time they want to go to bed, whether they want to go to school. Those are decisions that adults in their life make for them, with this belief that if left to their own devices, kids wouldn't go to bed. They would just eat junk food all day. They would choose not to go to school. And even though that may be what they want to do, we know that that is not what is best for them. So paternalism for children is a very common practice. Nobody really thinks twice about it. But in the US, we also see a lot of policies and procedures that are steeped in paternalism around adults and in particularly women. So laws around reproductive rights, things like access to bank loans and who gets a loan and who doesn't, who gets a small business loan and who doesn't, hiring practices, even down to plain old mansplaining, are all subject to gender-based paternalism and this belief that women cannot be trusted to make certain decisions or hold certain positions or be experts in certain areas and certain professions that are typically viewed as being more masculine based professions.
It sounds like a lot of social norms are a combination of expectations of what it means to be a woman and then beliefs about what women can and cannot do successfully. So, how does all of this relate to cannabis?
Well, I think you said it perfectly. So let's break this down based on the two dimensions that you outlined. First, expectations of what it means to be a woman. And we went over this in our last episode on cannabis and sex. So traditionally, women have had the role of caretaker to children and to her husband. And with this expectation comes a responsibility. How can a woman fully and responsibly take care of other humans if she herself is intoxicated, right? So it was okay for her husband to imbibe, but she's expected to be sober. And not just because of the caretaker role, but if she were to partake, she might get loud or voice her opinion or decide that maybe she doesn't like being a caretaker or that her husband should take more of the responsibility. In a word, she might get bold. And traditionally, bold women were not valued or encouraged. They were expected to be shy and passive. And even though women have come a long way in that respect, we still see men espousing the ideals of yesterday. And we see modern movements like the trad wives movement coming into fashion, encouraging these same old fashioned expectations. So when people use cannabis, their mind expands. They may get loud or bold or question societal norms. And none of these activities have been traditionally celebrated for women.
So, what about the beliefs of what women can and cannot do?
So, this is where we get into paternalism. Now, there are some circumstances where paternalism is completely accepted by society. We already talked about when it comes to the behavior of children. But when it comes to women, it's really when the woman is pregnant. So, there are states that drug test women, and when they give birth, they can have their babies taken away or they can be arrested if they come up positive. There are laws about serving pregnant women alcohol, about them buying cigarettes. There are warning signs about the effects of certain products and environments on pregnant women. And while these laws may be carried out in the name of safety to the unborn child, they also assume that without them, women will make poor choices about what to put in their bodies, what to buy, and where to go. It's like, oh, if we didn't tell a woman that it was bad for her to be pregnant and be around this noxious paint, she would just go on inhaling it and have no idea that maybe this wasn't something that was healthy for her or her baby. So this paternalism extends to cannabis. For example, in Massachusetts, a pregnant woman cannot obtain a medical cannabis card, even though it has been highly reported that cannabis can help treat extreme cases of morning sickness. And even after the baby is born, mothers face stigma for using cannabis, as do women in general. Part of this is wrapped up in the opinion that women should not smoke because it's not ladylike. But underneath is the belief that this shame of women using cannabis is necessary because women cannot make good decisions about their own health and well being, and that activities like smoking or labor intensive jobs or extreme sports may somehow impact her ability to fulfill her true role, which as a society, we have decided is that of being a mother.
Well, also, I think you were talking about, or maybe referring to, it's also not ladylike to smoke. So I feel like there's some judgment to women, mothers, and women in general, even if they don't have kids, who smoke. Like, ew.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I remember growing up when, what was it, Newports? I think there was this one cigarette company where their slogan was, "You've come a long way, baby." And then it was a woman smoking a cigarette. And the message behind that was that you are now, as a woman, you're like, fuck it, I'm going to smoke. And like that, me smoking is a sign of my feminism and is a sign of me, bucking the system and pushing back against these ideas that this is something that women just don't do. So even though I don't encourage smoking cigarettes as a behavior, it was interesting to see that a cigarette company kind of picked up on the fact that a woman smoking was somehow rebellious. And we also had the Capri cigarettes. I don't know if you remember those, but they were like cigarettes for women. And they were super long and thin and looked different than men's cigarettes, which was kind of this idea of like, well, women can smoke, but they can only smoke certain types of cigarettes. So, yes, there's definitely a whole thing tied up in smoking and women that kind of intersects with this idea of what it means to be a woman and be intoxicated. And on top of that, be a woman and be intoxicated on a substance that is going to encourage you to question societal norms.
Yeah. And a lot of this led women to secretly smoking or consuming cannabis because back then, we didn't have all of these options like we do today. But we did have tinctures. I know those are your favorite.
Yes, tinctures have been along for a very, very long time. And we do see women preferring manufactured products like edibles to things like joints and bowls, which we see more commonly used with men. So I do think women have more options, but I also think that, we talked about this in a previous episode because of women's role of being a caretaker. When cannabis was illegal, she was facing a higher risk of being found out as a consumer. And so, we talk about how for a long time, the data on cannabis consumers really leaned heavily male. And in reality, we don't know if that's because it was actually leaning so heavily male or if women were just less likely to admit that they were cannabis consumers because they faced sanctions that had to do with threatening their families.
Yeah. Well, I feel like in this area, we're currently going backwards, not forwards. So, how do we as women combat these old fashioned expectations and attempts at control?
Well, I mean, the easiest answer is smoke weed. Go for the job you want, even if it's a traditionally male field. Play sports. Do whatever activities you want. Have kids. Don't have kids. Find a relationship partner who supports equal gender roles. I mean, that's kind of the easiest answer, right? Is just do what you want to do and don't let society tell you that because you're a woman you shouldn't be able to do it. But the societal stigma is really strong, and unfortunately, there are a lot of hidden and subconscious barriers in play. With the current administration, I feel it's going to get worse before it gets better. So I think that something that everyone can do is ask why, right? Just question the expectations and the paternalism. Because, like I said at the beginning of the show, a lot of times people feel a certain way about something, but they've never really thought about why they feel that way about that thing. And they may not even realize that that feeling could have been generated just by propaganda or stereotypes that they see without really even stopping to question. I mean, the definition of propaganda is really getting someone to feel a certain way through an emotional response without the use of critical thinking. And I've had this experience when I have been working in cannabis policy reform. And I would talk to groups who would say that they were against legalization and they thought cannabis should remain illegal. And I would say, instead of being like, well, that's ridiculous and here's all the reasons, I would just ask them why. Like, why do you think that? And a lot of times they would come back with, well, I don't know. I just feel that it's wrong. And that feeling came from propaganda. It came from an anti drug film that they saw, or a stereotype, or a news story that they heard that was sensationalized. So I think a really good approach is if someone says women shouldn't be in that position, or women shouldn't use cannabis, or women should have children, just ask them why. Why do you feel that way? It's really easy to respond with, that's ridiculous, or you don't know what you're talking about. But like I said, many times people don't even know why they feel a certain way. So they're just reacting to their gut. So asking why may just open up a really valuable conversation. Oh, you're a woman, you're a mother, you shouldn't be using cannabis. Why? Why shouldn't I be? What is it? And then you can kind of get to the root of the issue. And if they're saying, well, you would be too messed up to take care of your kids, say, would you feel the same way if I was drinking a beer? Or, well, then how come my husband, you're not giving him a hard time? Doesn't he equally have a responsibility to take care of the children? So I think going and diving a little bit deeper into what's behind that feeling is a good way to unwrap.
Yeah, the two words that come to mind for me are limited beliefs. And like you said, ask yourself, is this your thought, your belief, or was it put there by someone else? And usually you're like, oh, wow. Because I kind of think like, I don't have a problem with someone doing something they want to do as long as they're not harming themselves or another person. And so I think if a woman wants to consume cannabis, she should be allowed to consume cannabis without judgment. But unfortunately, we are faced with a lot of judgment. So, going back to the title of this episode, women are not allowed to use cannabis because of antiquated ideas of what it means to be a woman, the role women should play, the trust we have in them to make rational decisions that are best for them and the people they love. Does that sound about right?
Absolutely. I think you summed it up perfectly.
Yeah. Well, this was a fascinating topic, and I'm so glad we had this discussion today. If you liked this episode and you got your own story, your own question, or your own insight on this topic or another one related to our show, drop us a line at info@mypersonalplants. Your voice matters here, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. So, if you're ready to take a deep dive into breaking stigmas and exploring the world of plant-based wellness, don't forget to browse our YouTube Garden of Knowledge. There is so many informative and exciting episodes there that you'll enjoy. So subscribe, like, and ring that bell. Don't hit the bell. And to stay connected until next time, stay empowered, stay inquisitive, and help us blaze the trail for more inclusive cannabis conversation. We'll see you next time.